everybody, and welcome back to MFA Writers. We're so happy to have you here. This episode is coming out the fourth week of August, which I know for many listeners means the first week of classes. So I just wanted to take a minute to say good luck to all of you who are returning to school this week. And I especially want to wish all the best to anyone who is starting their MFA in the coming days. Here's hoping you all experience lots of growth, make lots of connections, and have lots of fun. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Lewis Millholland. Lewis is a writer and video game developer whose fiction and essays have appeared in journals like Passages North, Diagram, and the Garlic Press. Currently, he is a third-year MFA student at Boise State University, where he serves as the associate editor of the Idaho Review and lives with a stolen or maybe rescued jade plant. We're going to ask him about that later. But before that, Lewis has brought a short piece to read for us titled The Indiana Bell.
The Indiana Bell. October 1930. It was determined that the most sensible course of action would be to lift and rotate the 22 million pound Indiana Bell building to the adjoining lot. Because of the thousands of telecommunication lines running through the Indiana Bell, lines that had 600 employees connected every day between those who wished to speak and those willing to listen, this acrobatic feat was the only way to avoid an interruption in service, and there was to be no interruption in service. Steel jacks slid under the building's base, and a team hauled on their iron levers to hoist the 7 stories of brick and mortar and digitized speech into the air. To the creatures that lived in the darkness below, it was as if heaven itself had broken open, the dirt and muck of the Indiana Bell sprinkling down like stars. I stood sentinel on New York Street as the structure was set onto a series of hydraulic rollers. My legs shook, and I nearly bit through my cigarette in the interval between the building clearing one roller and sliding onto the next. I am the lead architect's son. I am not an architect, but a writer. My architect father has read some or none of my novels. I know it to be true that a child cannot hide their weaknesses from a parent, not those vulnerabilities that glow red and hot and invite pain. I am grateful that my father has not yet chosen to press down, because he knows that every night I telephone my fiancée and appraise her of the building's progress. I tell my fiancée that it takes men 6 hauls of the iron jacks to rotate the Indiana Bell just 3/8 of an inch. The building's guts have been realigned for this phase of unprecedented dynamicism, and I scowl at the slack utility cable spidering beneath, and I scowl at the flexible pipes ferrying water in and sewage out. There must be leniency in dynamic times, my father tells me. Do you understand there must be leniency? My architect father asks me, in uncertain times. I say yes, because that's what he wants to hear. But it's a lie. I know there must be no interruption in service. When I telephone my fiancée, I tell her the worst part of my day is watching all those wires beneath my father's colossal gyroscope threaten to tauten, twist, and snap, of not being able to call her. I do not tell her that the actual worst part of my day is when she goes silent so long that I fear the line has gone dead, when I fail to capture her fickle heart's attention with a story, a joke, a question. How tall is the tallest building in New York? Is there truly every color of the rainbow in a pigeon's neck? Does the street noise keep you up at night? At night, are you already awake? At night, who are you with? The Indiana Bell's 600 employees report to work each day on a rotating gangplank. My sentinel shifts between streets as the Bell changes addresses, and despite the snow down my collar, or the sun in my eyes, or the wind up chapped nostrils, there has been no interruption in service. My father is a lead architect, and he has assured me there will be no interruption, no severing the line between Indiana and New York. My father is not a writer but an architect, and as such, he takes promises seriously. When he says a building will move, it will move. I am an architect. Before I act, I consider everything from three sides. I move slow. My son is not an architect, but a writer. There are fathers in my son's books. I am either every father in his books, or I am none of them. My son stands sentinel for the Indiana Bell and tells me that he is finally interested in the family business. He is writing a novel on my work. He is a liar. He is a writer. I cannot ask him to what greater or lesser degree the fathers in his novels are me. At night, when my liar son finishes his telephone call to his fiancée, his chewed-up fingernails shining wet and gummy in the lamplight, he seeks solace in dark streets that smell of dead flowers. He does not know that I know where he goes. He refuses to grant leniency and yet demands leniency be granted upon himself. I am not an architect but a writer. My architect father has read none or all of my novels. He can understand love, despite my mother. My father knows how to lift a 22 million pound building without steam power because my father is a literal man, and when one's vocabulary is small, so is one's hesitation. His. He is a man who can move a building but not a woman. My mother. I am a man who can move neither, not the Indiana Bell and not my fiancée. Despite my fears, my father has read none of my novels. I am sure of it. There is to be no interruption in service. When I make a promise, I do keep it, but insinuation of a promise is not a promise. New York City. 22 million pounds. I am not an architect, but a standing sentinel. My father cannot, has read my novels. There can be no interruption between. Every color of the rainbow, three sides to everything. In its neck, go slow, avoid error. I am not an architect. I am an architect. My son lies to his fiancée. My son fucks prostitutes. I am a novelist. I am engaged. I am in love. I frequent dead flower boulevards. There must be, he doesn't believe me, 22 million pounds. He knows in periods of unprecedented dynamism. He knows there must be leniency. I am writing a novel. I swear I am writing a novel. There must be. On November 14th, 1930, the Indiana Bell Building finished its historic revolution. The feat was completed in 34 days at an average rate of 15 inches per hour, and the old building's replacement was erected within just 2 years. This interruption-free hoisting, spinning, and replacement of an American office building has not since been repeated.
Louis, that was great. So good to hear you read. I'd read the piece before, but it's really nice to hear you read it. Thanks for sharing it with us. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, no, that was really great. I mean, we have to start there. We have to talk about this piece and the events that inspired it because they're really kind of unbelievable, but they're true, right? That in 1930, in Indianapolis, I believe, they picked up a building and moved it down the street, which is just kind of crazy. So I'm interested to hear how you heard about this story and what made you want to write about it.
Yeah, actually, I got to shout out my friend Laura at Goldstein's, the best bagel shop in Boise. She was the one who, we're just sitting there and she shows me on her phone a stop frame video of the building moving. It's crazy. You can just see it rotating and moving to the other address. And yeah, I didn't believe it was real, so I had to Google it later. And then while Googling it, the story got even crazier than the fact that this building moved. The lead architect of it was Kurt Vonnegut Sr.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's wild.
And so I was imagining, I think Kurt Vonnegut was 9 years old when this happened.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining little Kurt watching his dad move a building. And I was thinking, what that would do to a writer when they saw that.
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention in the reading, so it was moved, and then a new building went up, and then in 33 years, they were both torn down to make way for a bigger one.
I did read that afterwards. I'm like, there's this magical feat of engineering that they accomplished, and then 30 years later, it was just wiped out. It's something very sad, but also poetic about that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, my next question was going to be about the characters in this piece, because I like the idea that you found out that the actual architect is Kurt Vonnegut's father. So then you're like starting there. But how did the characters form from there? Because obviously, this isn't actually Kurt Vonnegut. This character's not 9 years old. This character's older.
No, this character's not 9 years old.
Yeah. So how did the characters develop from there?
So from there, there's what's the term? The objective correlative. Like as writers, I feel like we always have this impulse to take our emotions and to force objects to reflect that back to us. Like the classic one is the whistling tea kettle right at the height of the feud. And I was thinking like what anxiety is worth like a 7-story building being moved? And I was thinking the first thing that came up is an affair, romance, dissolution of a marriage. And that was kind of the half of the son's anxiety. But then more I was thinking about what would the father be feeling as he saw this? Because he's very confident the whole time. He doesn't think it's going to fall. But there has to be some anxiety he would project. And yeah, I think it was just the weight of the story that kind of forced them. It brought them out. So it was maybe the objective correlative, but in reverse.
Interesting. And I like the idea of thinking like, okay, there are the events that are taking place in the story that are having or are causing reactions in the characters. But there's also other things in their lives that are on their mind, right? Like none of us move through any day, through any set of events without some other thing in our life being on our mind at that moment. So it's an interesting idea to be like, okay, this thing is happening to these characters, but what's the other thing that's on their mind as this is happening? And let's use that to like create energy.
That was really well said. Yeah, I love that.
Do you have like are there parts of your process that you return to time and time again? Or are you really one of those writers that's like, I try to block all that stuff out when I'm drafting and just write?
I'm probably more the latter. What I'll do is I'll go back. I do a lot of my writing in my notebook, so it's all handwritten. And so every day before I start writing again, I'll reread what I've already written to that point. And then once I get bored or I don't like my own writing, then I'll draw like a little symbol in my notebook. And then the next blank page, I'll draw that symbol again and I'll pick up the story from that point.
Interesting.
So it kind of becomes like a fern, it keeps growing off at different places. And I'll just follow the path that I like the most.
Yeah. And follow the energy, I guess. Like you said,
exactly.
if you start to get bored, then you'll like try this other thing to like get the energy back. Whatever you're doing is working because the energy in this piece, as listeners could tell from your reading, it's up there, right? Like this piece has got momentum that like builds and builds and builds and builds as you're moving through the piece. It gets more frenetic as you're moving through it. And the form is super interesting. I mean, the story at first is told from the son's point of view, then it switches to the father's point of view, and then it does this thing where it's kind of moving back and forth to the point where sometimes you're like unsure who is speaking, and the characters kind of start to meld together in some ways, which I think is really interesting because it kind of shows how the characters are similar, but it also points out the distance between these characters, which to me is saying something about father-son relationships in general. And I know form is something that you think about a lot. So how were you thinking about the form of this piece?
Yeah, this piece was actually very functional-minded in its form. In Boise, we have this big springtime event called Story Fort, where a bunch of readers will go out and share their work. And our program, all of us grad students in the MFA program, we all read at that event. And I didn't have any stories ready for it. A lot of my stories are more meant to be read. And I kind of wanted to create something that would be easy for someone to follow when they're listening to it. Because I don't know about you, but I'm a really bad audience member at fiction readings. I feel like I get lost, I get distracted, I forget who the characters are, and then I pick up later and I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do is I wanted to make I wanted to engineer a piece that was short, had a lot of repetition, no dialogue, because that's hard to follow, and that had noticeable voice changes. So I know you've seen the written version of this, and you've heard the spoken one. And so you know how some of the spacing gets funky and there's italics in there, and I'm trying to emulate how my voice would modulate.
In general, when drafting a story, how do you think about form? Or in other words, how do you think writers can use form to enhance the themes of their stories or engage readers in new and interesting ways?
I think there's so many ways that it can be really useful, from small things to big things. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking about lately is you go to any bookstore and you pick up a work of new fiction. They'll all sort of look alike, paragraph, paragraph, dialogue, dialogue, which is obviously a very powerful form to tell a story in. That's why so many stories are told that way. But then it kind of raises the question of what if you deviated from that? What would that do? This phrase came up a lot in my creative nonfiction class one semester. We said formal experimentation for playing with form.
Yeah.
Even though it sounds like an oxymoron.
Right. I mean, one of the places that you have been published, I noticed, was in Diagram. And Diagram is known for publishing a lot of like formally interesting pieces. Do you read a lot of journals that are doing interesting things with forms? Is that something you seek out? Do you find having a motivation to play with form is generative for you when you're like starting a new piece?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's drawn me to Diagram. Because you never know what you're going to get, and you never know what the form is going to be doing to the story. And I do find it generative for me. There's one story that I turned in a workshop last semester where when I was an undergrad, I was a business major. And so I read a lot of Harvard Business Review case studies. And those are surprisingly a lot more interesting than they sound.
Really?
Yeah, there was one on Formula One that was so cool. It told this whole narrative of the people who, the drivers, the chassis constructors, and then the engine producers, and like the different financial incentives and like the give and take between all of them. It was really engaging, but it was always a little strange because it had business on its mind and kind of a journalistic regard for the truth and like the objective truth. So I could tell sometimes the writers would they'd be pushing up against that. They'd want to get a little more intimate with their subjects and describe how they were feeling, but they couldn't because the form didn't allow that. And that actually made it kind of exciting to see that tension. So in my piece, it was a fictionalized version of the Pokemon competitive scene. And I have it's very objective the whole time, but you can tell the person who's writing really has a deep appreciation for the people in it and has to kind of walk back some of the sadnesses that they're not able to communicate in that piece. And yeah, it was very generative. Whenever I got stuck, I would just put in a new table of like data figures in that story. And I think just other examples, like when you're writing an epistolary story, that gives you the sense of familiarity and you can always play with that. Or whatever Jennifer Egan was doing with that PowerPoint chapter in Goon
right.
Squad.
Right. She was having fun, right? She like wasn't being pigeonholed into whatever you would expect a publisher to want when it comes to form, right? She was experimenting. She was trying something new, and it is super engaging. Do you think that that's something that like emerging writers should be giving themselves more permission to do, play with form?
Absolutely. I don't know why you wouldn't.
What do you think is the benefits of that for an emerging writer?
I think in some ways, it's just nice to have no shackles, do whatever you want. But it also does kind of make you question what things in the default are doing and how you want to use that. Like if you've gone, off the deep end, right? You're writing PowerPoint stories, and then you come back and you're reading more traditional prose format, and you get to a section break, just an empty line between two paragraphs. You start to question like, what is that? Was that doing? It's probably a jump in time and place. And then you think your next story, well, what if I write something with a section break that doesn't shift those? Like what effect would that do? I think it's cool because it, one, gives you more venues for storytelling and some, structures that can be useful and generative. But then also it just makes you really question the tools you've always been working with and see those in a new light and maybe use them in a new way. In your writing, do you play with how the form of the piece looks?
I do sometimes. When I entered my MFA program, I didn't have a whole lot of formal experience with creative writing. I hadn't studied creative writing as an undergrad. I had taken a couple creative writing classes. I had done a lot of writing on my own. But I really felt when I was entering my MFA program that I was still trying to figure out who I was as a writer and what I wanted to be as a writer, what my voice was going to be, what forms resonated with me. So before I went into my MFA program, I gave myself permission before even going to just go wild. A lot of people go into MFA programs with a project in mind. And I think if you're at a certain point in your kind of progression as a writer, that's a good thing. For me, I wasn't at that point yet. I was still trying to figure out who I was as a writer. So I was like, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to play around. If I have some wild idea, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to write some stories that are terrible, but I'm also going to write probably a few that are good.
That's what workshop is for.
Right, exactly. So I think that was beneficial for me. I wrote a lot of kind of wild stories. And I do think in some ways it helped me realize what I was good at or not so good at, or what was generative for me, and what was fun to write, but maybe didn't really work, for readers.
Those can be really important lessons.
Yeah. But I think that's good. It's a good thing for listeners to think about, right? That the MFA is not the same for everybody. You need to think about like where you are as a writer and what's going to be most beneficial to you as a writer when you enter an MFA program, thinking about how you want to spend the next 2 or 3 years. And sometimes that can be just experimenting, playing around, seeing what works. What was your kind of mindset when you went into the program?
It was very energized. I was very excited. I really hadn't had any type of structured writing experience before then. I've been a journalist, but that's not creative writing. I've been a software developer, video game developer, but the closest I came to a writing community, writing instruction was in Bushwick. There's this little bar called The Keep. We would meet there on Tuesdays and write together. And I was able to get into an MFA program, and I kind of thought that this is going to be amazing. And it has been, actually getting a writing instruction, being in a writing community. These were things that I was really, really looking forward to.
And you ended up at Boise State University, which is a fully funded 3-year program with tracks in both fiction and poetry. If I'm not mistaken, you were in Pittsburgh before this. So what was it about this program that motivated you to move across the country to Boise, Idaho? And was that a difficult decision?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it was hard because I loved Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is still like my favorite place I've ever lived. I had a great community. That whole city is such a playground with its hills and its old mining staircase and its rivers. So that was definitely hard to say goodbye to. But the program just kind of checked kind of all the boxes that I was interested in. And they also had one of the current students call me so I could talk to her and get her take on what life is like at BSU. But the things that really drew me were a lot of the recent grads and the faculty had published some books I really liked. Just a quick list. Jackie Paulson's Brood, Emily Ruskovich's Idaho, and Mitch Whelan's God's Dogs. And I found out later that the program really does have an emphasis on novels as well as short stories. And I think that's kind of why there's been a lot of graduates who are pumping out novels that are really cool.
It's really important, isn't it, to find a program where people are writing stuff that really resonates with you? That's an important part of this when you're thinking about where to apply, right?
Yeah, it's huge. And I was really excited about this school, so I'm glad they said yes. But also just some more nuts and bolts stuff. You teach every semester, which I was excited to do. And you get to teach in your genre. So you're not teaching the comp classes. You're teaching in the beginning, intro to fiction or intro to poetry, and then you can move up higher from there. But you teach the things that you care about and are doing. And it's just one class a semester too, so it's not an overwhelming teaching load.
So what's that experience been like? How important do you think it is to be able to teach in your genre instead of teaching composition classes, which is kind of the norm in most MFA programs when you have a teaching assistantship? Usually you're teaching composition classes.
Yeah. So I actually am a little ignorant here because I've never taught a comp class, but teaching in your genre, it's stuff that I care about when I'm at the front of the room, and I really care about my students' work. And the best thing is, I had some students who, they during my class, their writing would shift a little bit, and then they'd leave, and I wasn't really sure that I had an impact on them. You always question, like, am I providing value to them? But then later on, I'd be teaching a higher level course, and some of my old students would come into those, and I can see what they're writing at a 6-month, 1 year remove, and they got so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, not say they were starting low, but like they're really working at it, and to see their growth was so exciting.
Yeah. It's really cool to watch students progress. I've been a teacher for a long time, and in my experience, nothing affects a class more than the energy level that a teacher brings to it and the excitement that a teacher brings to it. And that is the thing that you cannot fake. So being able to teach something that you are actually really jazzed about completely changes the vibe in the classroom. Then if you're coming in, you're like, okay, I have to teach this thing that I'm not really stoked about. The students are going to feed off that energy and it's going to really affect the class.
Yeah, for sure. Have you taught comp?
I've taught comp. Yeah, I've taught everything.
Yeah. How would you describe your experience with that?
I mean, I studied secondary English education, so composition was kind of in my wheelhouse. So I enjoyed it to a certain extent. The biggest difficulty is that composition is a required course for pretty much every student in a university, and so you have a lot of students who, they're just there because they have to get the credit and they don't want to take that class, and that's just tough. It's tough to reach those students. Where if you're teaching a workshop, you're teaching fiction or poetry, most of those students are in that class because they're really interested in creative writing. And so you're just already starting from a space that's so much more positive and energetic than you would be otherwise.
Yeah, that's actually something I've experienced too. Like the creative writing major students who take the my classes, they want to be there, they know what they're doing. But the not the out of major students, like I've had a bunch of nursing students come in and they're like, I got this one story idea or this one novel idea, and I'm gonna do it during your class, and you're gonna give me all the tools I need. And they come so energized and so curious, and they're the
Yeah,
ones who always ask to like get coffee outside of class to like go over what they're doing. Yeah, I think that's all that what you're saying is exactly right. The students they self-select because they care about it and they're interested too.
totally. And that's just like that energy just bounces back and forth between the teachers and the students and just makes for a lot more fun semester in my experience. Um, So you moved from the East Coast all the way out to Boise, Idaho. Did the jade plant theft happen in Boise, or did you transport it across state lines?
Well, I hope no cops are listening to this. No, this happened in Berkeley. I was Berkeley, California. I was visiting a friend, and I said I really wanted a jade plant. Kind of, I don't know. The color is beautiful to me. Those like little fat leaves, and so one day we're walking along, and they're huge out there. There are trees of jade, and he says he'll get me a clipping, and I'm really excited. And then he makes this clipping, but it's like a foot and a half tall. Like it's a monstrously big thing. So I brought that back to Boise with me, and that's how I say I rescued it.
And you've kept it alive?
I have, and my housemate who is currently there is keeping it alive. Thanks, Trey.
All right. So one thing that I noticed about the Boise State program when I was looking on the website is it seems like the program is on the smaller side. There's about 6 to 10 students in each genre at any given time, which means only 2 to 3 students are accepted per genre each year. What have been the pros and cons in your experience of working in a small program like that?
Yeah, it's definitely quite small. You know everybody in both the poetry and the fiction genres. And the pros of that are that there's a lot of cross genre socialization. Like you do get to know everybody, hang out with them. So we every fall we watch Over the Garden Wall. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's this like perfect autumnal cartoon that's meant for kids, but of course has a lot of depth in it that adults can appreciate. So sometimes we'll dress up and, make cider and go watch that.
Nice.
And but then the benefit of having this relationship with everybody is that you can also just kind of slip into maybe more like craft or writing conversations, and it's not like a big to-do. We influence each other's work a lot. Like poets are always giving me books to read, and they'll read my work too, which is amazing. And we even take some classes together. We had one creative nonfiction class, which is not a typical offering at Boise State, but I think we had 12 out of 16 of our students take that. So just everybody together writing essays, and you kind of got to see how different people used their backgrounds and brought that to it. And then the downside is, probably what you get in any small space, any small town. If two people happen to be beefing in the program, it's kind of everybody's problem for a little bit until it blows over. But it's very rarely a problem. Usually it's drinking cider and watching Over the Garden Wall vibes.
And I imagine too, with the smaller program, you probably have a fair amount of opportunity to interact with the faculty members. What's that been like?
You do, yeah. Our faculty is great. They show up to class very, very ready to go. But then also they're always down to get coffee or a drink sometime if you want to talk more. They really do make time for the students. And, I've been to a lot of their backyards. They'll throw big get-togethers with not only our department, but also theater and film professors and students. So you get to meet a lot of people through that.
And what about Boise? I don't know much about Boise, Idaho. What's it like living there? What's the art scene like there?
Great question. I've been there for 2 years now, and I'm an East Coast boy. And right now I'm on the East Coast, so you can see there's some curls in my hair. Those go away in Boise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a high desert, so it's very dry. Boise itself is kind of the end of the plains where the Boise River comes through, and then the foothills start, and then after the foothills, just these huge, staggering mountains of Idaho. I think America's deepest gorge is in Idaho, even deeper than the Grand Canyon. But yeah, so if a lot of people in our program, they like snow sports or mountain biking or hiking. I've done a lot of backpacking up in the Sawtooths, and it's pretty amazing just for the majesty of the nature out there. And there's a lot of focus on the downtown and the Boise area because I think Boise is America's most isolated city. And that if you want to go to another one, I think the closest is Salt Lake, which is a 4.5 hour drive away. So you're pretty much in Boise or you're in the throes of nature. So that's been interesting to get used to when I've been, I've come from a very developed East Coast area. Oh, but you're asking about the art scene. There are so many little reading series that, just to name a few, there's Death Rattle, Backyard Artists, and more popping up, it seems like every day. So you can always go to a coffee shop or a bar or someone's basement, honestly, and there's a lineup of local poets and prose writers ready to share. There's also there's the Cabin. The Cabin's it's actually a cabin, but they get a lot of guest speakers that come in, so established authors, and they also have workshops for people who want to just work on their writing in a group setting. And they even have summer camps for kids who are interested in learning how to write while in going down to the river and playing in the grass. They bring a lot of cool names. I've seen Ira Glass from NPR there, and Richard Powers. And I was just looking at their lineup, and I saw that Alison Bechdel is going to be there next year, which I'm pretty hyped for. There's a lot of writing stuff going on, but also with the arts, there's this one cool place called Freak Alley. It's a little corridor between a bunch of restaurants that is just totally given over to graffiti artists. And so you have these murals that some of them will go, I think 20 feet tall, I'm going to estimate. But they're overlapping, and some have been there for a while. Some are getting tossed up new ones all the time. It's definitely a good spot to go check out when you're in Boise.
How could you live in the most isolated city in the U.S. and not have a decent punk scene, right?
Right?
So I was also reading that there's this big music festival, Tree Fort, that takes place in or around Boise, and that there's an accompanying literary fest called Story Fort. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, in the spring, you ever find yourself at the week and you don't know what to do, come to Treefort. There are hundreds of bands that come out over like a 6-day period, and every single venue in town is turned over to music.
Cool.
So like even the Bass Cultural Center, you can go in there and see a band playing. And yeah, coffee shops, bars, and of course the music venues. So it's just constant music of every flavor, and to the point where you're not even really targeting the ones that you're interested in. You're just kind of walking around the street and saying, "Oh, that sounds neat. Let me go in there." And then there's a bunch of other sister forts, they call them. So there's a yoga fort, there's a coding fort, and then notably a story fort. So they get a bunch of writers from around the country to come in and read. They also have different events like poetry and mimosas, where it's what it sounds like in the morning. Last morning, have mimosas, listen to poetry. They also have these reading series during Story Fort, which are local authors. So some of my students have read at that. Graduates from our program have read at that. People who, you have 80-year-old people going up there and reading these beautiful poems that they've been reading and they've been writing, and you just wouldn't hear it anywhere else. And this is actually this is the one that I wrote the Indiana Bell story for, because there's also a MFA student reading. So every year we go there and we read our stories, we read our poems, and we're usually, since we're now performing at Story Fort, we're usually given a free pass to Tree Fort. So not only do we get to share our work, but then we get to fully indulge in that week of amazing music.
Yeah, it sounds like a great week. I also have to ask about the Sun Valley Writers Conference, which I know takes place close to Boise, and I've read has a relationship of some kind with the MFA program. So what's that conference like, and how is it connected to the program?
Yeah, Sun Valley is gorgeous. It's this little like perfect pocket in the mountains. It's in Sun Valley has several towns, but most of the stuff that we do is in Ketchum, where is Hemingway spent the last few years of his life. And yeah, so Sun Valley Writers Conference. Yeah, I do want to mention that, but also just some other things that we do with Sun Valley in general. We go to a Hemingway seminar every fall, where they've had some cool speakers like Sherman Alexie come out, and then we go and get to come to all the panels. But we also lead discussion groups for local Ketchumites about the book that everyone's read for the conference. It's a different Hemingway work every year. And then we also get to do these writing workshops in Hemingway's house. I've been there with Adam Johnson as the guest workshop leader. But in the past, there's also been Joy Williams has done it twice. And then there was Rick Bass.
That's great.
That was pretty special to have Adam Johnson talk about my story in Hemingway's house.
Yeah, I bet.
Okay, sorry. Let me actually answer the question you asked. The Sun Valley Writers Conference. Sun Valley Writers Conference is awesome. I just got back from it about 2 weeks ago. Also in Ketchum, it's at this beautiful resort, and you get some really big name writers. Some of the big names this year were Salman Rushdie and Ocean Vuong. The way the fellowship works is they take 8 fellows every year, and there are always 2 slots for BSU students of those 8, and so you're competing amongst your cohort. Everybody sends in, you apply, and then each year they pick 2 that they want to bring out. So they really pamper you. You stay in this lovely cottage. You have all your dinners, your cocktail hours, everything handled, and so then you have these amazing writers, and twice I was in the salad line and I'm just walking next to Salman Rushdie. And that was pretty amazing just to be around them. But beyond just the being starstruck, it was so cool to like hang out with published authors and be able to just kind of gab. Like some of them, we were hanging out with Sonia Purnell, who's this great biographer. And I'm just talking to her about like Doctor Who and English football for a while. But then you can also talk to writers, and the people are really open there about the publishing process. So as a new writer, or an emerging writer, I should say, I don't really know how to get a book deal, how to get an editor, what that process is like, how much time it takes. If I do get an offer on my book, do I take one that's more money, but an editor I don't like as much as another? There's this opacity that I haven't been able to see through. And talking with people who have been there and done that and have consistently done that, getting those kind of candid, casual answers from them at a cocktail hour or at a dinner was hugely useful.
Yeah, it's invaluable, really. It's one of the benefits of going to an MFA program in general, but every person has different experiences. They've had different insights, and getting as much and as many of those perspectives as possible is huge, I think, when you're first coming up. Okay, so we already talked about teaching at Boise State, so we know that you get to teach creative writing classes instead of comp classes. You mentioned that the workload is one class per semester, I believe. One thing I saw on the website was that the stipend is around $11,500 per year, which is on the lower side, but it does include health insurance. I imagine Boise is not the most expensive place to live, so I'm just curious to hear you talk about that funding package, if anything's changed on that front, and whether you've been able to live on that stipend.
Yeah, that stipend's accurate.
Okay.
That hasn't changed. Everyone kind of wishes we got more money, but that's the most they can give us right now. So most people do take second jobs. Some are bartenders, some write articles for local publications. Some people specifically people who did not come straight from undergrad, have some savings they can work through. And so they can just fully do the program. But yeah, that's a very real consideration. But like you said, Boise is pretty cheap to live in.
Yeah, it's always something to like take into account, because $11,000 in one place is a lot different than $11,000 in another place. So just thinking about cost of living, being realistic about how you want to live in your time during the MFA program, all things to consider when you're applying to Boise State or any MFA program out there for sure. Okay, so outside of teaching, I also saw that there are opportunities to get publishing experience while in the program. So if you're a fiction student, you can work at the great literary magazine, the Idaho Review. And it sounds like if you're a poetry student, you can work at the publisher Free Poetry. I would love to hear you talk about these opportunities, what you know about each of them, and what your experience has been at the Idaho Review.
Well, thanks for calling it the Great Idaho Review.
It's a great magazine. Yeah.
Awesome. You're a reader?
Oh yeah, I've read lots of stories from Idaho Review. Yeah, it's a great magazine.
Oh, we got a really good one coming up in the next issue.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, let me answer your question. So free poetry, I can speak a little less to. I haven't really been involved in that, although I've read several of them, of course. They're published chapbooks. They always have this. They're really pretty. They kind of have like a soft background color and then like a more distinct title. So if you see a bunch of them in a row, they kind of have this like light and dark rainbow over all of them. And what they are is they're collections or translations or some type of poetic work. And they're always free. They have no copyright on them. It's kind of like a defiance of the publishing industry. And yeah, some of the people who we've had have been Dan Beachy-Quick, Cole Swenson, Peter Gizzi. And the really cool part about that is those poets also come in to BSU and they give a reading in the big organ room in our Hemingway building. And so you get to not only read their work, but then usually meet them. So yeah, and that's pre-poetry. And one student per year, that is their, they do that instead of teaching. That fulfills their teaching requirement. So they'll be the ones who actually distribute that and communicate with the authors and usually pick them up from the airport, bring them to their hotel when they come to visit Boise. The one I can speak a little bit more on is the Idaho Review. I'm going into my third and final year at BSU, so I'll be the associate editor of that this next year in lieu of my teaching requirement. But I've been on the Idaho Review for the past 4 semesters, because for grad students, it's one of the classes we can take. And what that looks like is we get access to our slush pile. So there's the big submittable queue, and the associate editor will take usually 10 of those a week and hand those out to different people. And then on your week, you read through, you say yes, no, maybe. And then there's always a second reader who's another student. And if we get 2 yeses on the piece, it goes to roundtable. And then this was my favorite part of the Idaho review and like why I was really excited about it. You're sitting at a table and everybody's read this story. Everybody has strong opinions on this story. And you just kind of battle it out. And it's so cool to hear different people's interpretations, especially because we've had more poets take it, at least since I've started. We do publish poetry also, but hearing a poet's commentary on a fiction piece is really enlightening. The way they'll pay attention to where a paragraph is broken has taught me a lot about my own writing.
Yeah, I've been in those rooms. I've been at those tables. I was just going to say, how cool is it to hear how different people's interpretations of the same story can be,
right?
And how much that tells you about your own writing and about writing in general. Have you found that like that experience changes the way you look at your own writing?
Definitely. Everything kind of tossed around in that room is so, because you're not talking about an established piece. And I feel like established pieces kind of have this aura about them that they're doing the correct thing if they've been published. But because we're dealing with unpublished works, different people's critique also kind of carries that. Is that a good critique for my writing? Is that not a good critique? And you kind of swallow all of that and sit on it. So it kind of all flows in you.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something that I thought about a lot when I was working at a lit mag, which was, there is no such thing as a good and a bad story. There's no such thing as like a correct and an incorrect story, because it's all of those terms are so subjective in art. There were so many times where I brought a story and I was like, this story is by far the best one we read this week. And other people are like, I hated that story. And you're like, oh, okay, this is all subjective. And I need to be like not so hard on myself and stop judging my work so harshly, because everybody's thoughts are going to be different on it, right? Your motivation needs to be different than just trying to write a story that can be published, because you can write a great story and sometimes that's not what matters in those rooms. Sometimes there are other factors.
That's a really beautiful and enlightened takeaway from that scenario. I still get really sad whenever someone doesn't like a story I bring to round table. I'm not thinking to how I'm going to change my writing. I'm just like, oh, I liked it.
Yeah. But I find it helpful when I get that rejection, right? When I send out a story and I get rejected, it's like, okay, that doesn't mean this is a bad story. It just means like it wasn't right for that room of people in that moment, right?
Yes. And it's cool to be on the other side of it. I send to lit mags a lot. I get rejected a lot. And it's cool to just see how the sausage is made. And it kind of gives you a thicker skin. But also, we've been trying to do a good job of, when you send a story out and you do get a rejection on it, but it's a tiered rejection and they say something nice they liked about the story. Like sometimes that's almost as good as getting published.
Almost.
Almost. So we've been trying to do the same. If there's stories that people do like or that got some consideration around table, we do try to include that in our response letters.
Okay, before we go, I want to ask you one last question I ask everybody who comes on. What is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
When I applied, I didn't have any formal writing experience. I was not an English undergrad. I wasn't in a workshop. And so I had this maybe magical view of what would happen over the next 3 years. I kind of thought that an MFA program was like this big boxy machine where you would feed me in on one side, and then at the other end, you'd have me with a 2-book deal, established writer.
Yeah, right.
Knowing what to say to Salman Rushdie besides salad. And I don't think that's how it's going to look exactly. I think in my experience, it's more, you have all these tools given to you. You have workshop, you have, the intentionality of what your professor brings to class and your letters. You have all that time given to you to write. You're given all these tools, but ultimately it's still on you to pick them up. And learning how to pick that up has been, it's been hard and it's been good. And yeah, it just wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the experience. That's part of the MFA experience that I was not expecting as well. Just how inundated I would be with new tools and how much time it would take to sort through those and figure out which ones are actually useful for me and my writing process. That takes time. And it'll take time even post MFA, I'm sure.
Do you feel like you're still doing that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's 2 to 3 years of just so much information, so much new information, it just takes time to sort through it. But keep going, and hopefully, once it's all done, you'll come out with that 2-book deal. I'm looking forward to reading them.
Awesome. I'll send you a copy.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, getting to know you, hearing your work.
Yeah, thanks for having me.